Colonel Rob Maness has a lifelong record of providing dedicated service to this nation. Having worked his way up from the enlisted ranks to full colonel, he served our country for more than 32 years. He has served as a bomber squadron commander, bomb disposal technician, Joint Chiefs of Staff Operations Officer, assisted the National Security Team with the campaign plan for the global war on terrorism. He authored the first theater nuclear war plan and served as the Vice Commander of America's largest airborne intelligence wing. Colonel Rob Maness is a true American hero. This is Rob Maness Live.
Look, it's January 29th. We are just 9 days out from a presidential transition, an administrative transition. The FAA administrator resigned at the end of the Biden administration, so there is no permanent confirmed FAA administrator right now. This is going to be a time when there's going to be a lot of public communication, right, and a lot of investigation of what happened here. What do you anticipate this transition period is going to mean for what happens today and tomorrow and in the coming days as we find out what happened here?
Well, the transition period for aviation, not just in the D.C. area, but for all of the United States, was extremely important. We have so many aviation issues brewing right now, and there's been, criticism of our national and our national aviation policy, routes, access to aviation, the constant roller coaster of hiring and firing of pilots, who has access, what are the routes, what are we going to do to get good service, and then throw in on top of that, things like, the drone traffic. And so I think it's very important. But first and foremost is these operations were entirely under the control of air traffic controllers. This is controlled airspace. And of course, air traffic controllers do not come and go with the change of political administration. We have fortunately, a very, highly trained career cadre of air traffic controllers, and that's important. So the politics of the situation should have had no impact whatsoever on the air traffic controllers and the good positive air traffic control.
Restoring faith in America's Defense Department and really the entire government. And welcome back to Truth Thursday here on the Rob Maness Show. And we're live on Worldview Tube, our X Spaces simulcast, Truth Social Plus, and now on the Rob Maness Show Rumble channel and our YouTube channel. So go subscribe over there, folks. Well, hiring personnel for critical positions and professions such as air traffic control should be based on merit, the best qualified for the job. Unfortunately, under the Biden administration, hiring for air traffic controllers and other positions at the Federal Aviation Administration was based on race, gender, and other disabilities instead of merit, even those with severe intellectual disabilities, if you watched President Trump's press conference just a little bit ago. Why is that important? Well, you just heard it. Last night's deadly crash in Washington, D.C. has tower controllers directly involved, in addition to an Army and civilian air crews, whose organizations have all done non-merit hiring these past few years. And that means we must investigate if the controllers involved were the best qualified when hired, including the air crews, both military and non-military. The Trump administration is taking a new direction and eliminating DEI hiring, especially at the Pentagon, to restore faith in our armed forces. The big question is, what are the pieces of policy we should implement to hold people accountable, restore those military personnel harmed by things like the COVID vaccine mandate, and refocus our force on lethality so the American people have faith in our military, and even more importantly, our adversaries respect us enough not to try to take us on. Well, my guest today to discuss all this is Lori Buckhout. She's a retired Army colonel and decorated combat commander, including commanding hundreds of troops in a task force as part of the initial spearhead attack into Iraq in 2003, and an expert in cyber and electronic warfare. She founded her own highly successful business after military retirement, Corvus Consulting, and that's a strategic consulting services group specializing in electronic warfare and cyberspace operations, and has served in various other capacities in the cyber and electronic warfare field across the government, such as in the Department of Commerce and commercial industry. Lori was also the GOP nominee for North Carolina's 1st District last year and endorsed by Donald J. Trump. Colonel Buckout, welcome back to the Rob Maness Show. Man, we have a lot to talk about, but first I have to say all the families and the passengers and air crews and everybody that's involved in this accident last night are in our prayers for sure. And we just want to get to the bottom of it so it doesn't ever happen again, don't we?
It's so heartbreaking. But, you and I share that military background of the after action review. And that means you comb through every single thing. And of course, you as an aviator know even better than I do how critical that is and how everyone's going to dig into every single reason. And we can't cover anything up. We can't say, oh, this happened maybe because of somebody who was hired for the wrong reason and then shift that aside. Everything needs to be brought to light because nothing grows well in the dark. As you know, as an aviator and as a fellow colonel, we need to lead those investigations and be tough and go into every single aspect of it. And I think President Trump is going to do that.
Yeah, I don't know if you saw his press conference a little bit over an hour ago, but the media from like CNN places, they're not very happy about him telling the truth about these hiring practices under the Biden administration and the Obama administrations for air traffic controllers, especially, and that he said we've got to look at that. It's unfortunate. I mean, normally we go back through everybody's training, see all the way back to their undergraduate pilot training and maintenance training and controller training and those kind of things. But now we have to add in this other piece so that we're investigating into people's lives even deeper than just their professional training. And the media doesn't like it. From your perspective, as both as a woman who has had to fight to be in a profession that hasn't always been friendly, but your perspective as someone who you fly all the time, I'm sure, as a passenger on airlines, don't you want us to get to the bottom of this and we have to look at DEI hiring practices because we don't want it to happen again, right?
I tell you what, we have to look at every hiring practice. I came up in the military of the 80s, and if anything, it was a lot more savage on women, at that time than giving me any extra opportunities. You had to fight for them. And, you really had to bring the best that you could. And if you weren't meeting weight standards, if you couldn't run fast, if you couldn't shoot well, if you couldn't do land navigation, all these basic soldiering skills, you had to do them and you had to do them well. Any hiring, especially in areas of such incredible required attention to detail and sharpness, like air traffic control or anything like that, or pilots or navigators, I can't imagine cutting any corners on quality. And I think that's absolutely critical to look into. I mean, I will say that the nation needs a little time to grieve because it was a horrific accident. And then we have to do the due diligence, and that will not be painful. I mean, that will be painful to some when you dig into those sorts of things. I'll raise something really, really quick. Accidents and things that happen. Shoot, I just lost that thought. But, at any rate, this is something that's going to have to be dug into, and it won't be pleasant. And it's something that you have to do.
Yeah, the Army's investigation practices are very similar to the Air Force. And since an Army air crew and aircraft are involved in this, there's been fatalities. They're going to run. They're already running their safety board investigation. That starts as quickly as possible. And I think the NTSB also has a safety aspect to the initial part of the investigation because we want to respect the families. And as you said, we have to have this grieving process, but we also have to get moving because if there's something time sensitive from a safety aspect, we have to get that word out there to folks. And this airspace is just so tightly controlled and every aviator that flies in it, all the controllers were all hyper vigilant. I've flown in this airspace quite a few times. I know the helicopter processes and operating procedures. Of course, I don't know the folks that are doing it now, but it's the same kind of mold, and I'm just very concerned that some people don't want to shine the light where it needs to be shown, and we've got to do that. And I think that's why people are so supportive of President Trump's executive orders, and we'll get into that for the rest of the show, especially regarding DOD, Lori, and that is that he has taken a very aggressive role, an aggressive approach to eradicating DEI, not just from DOD, but from the entire federal government, by putting all these people on leave, defunding the organizational pieces of it. And what are your thoughts on that, and how effective just that piece of it will be before we dive into some of the specifics that Hegseth is going to do?
Everything's better off when you have a meritocracy. You have a better nation. You have a better organization. I have commanded at many levels, as have you. I've followed at many levels, as has you. And I expected to meet the standard every time I was someplace or exceed the standard. When I was a company commander, when I was a battalion commander, I was tough on everyone. Regardless of your skin color, of your gender, your height, your weight, and, any of that nonsense, you had to meet the standards. It makes a better unit. It makes a better business. It makes a better organization. It certainly makes a better bureaucracy, and it makes a better teammate. If you know somebody is there because of the way that they perform, they have your back. You know that you can trust them in terms of writing policy or going into combat, in a shooting war. It's got to be a meritocracy, and frankly, it goes to everything from the Department of Defense down to raising our kids and in our schools. You know what? Teach these kids to be good. Don't teach them to be victims. Don't teach them to be oppressors. Teach them the skills they need to succeed in a meritocracy, because the rest of the world is a meritocracy,
Yeah, what do you say to those that, and we've heard it because we grew up in a military where equal opportunity training was mandatory, but it didn't teach people that, like what happens today in DEI training and critical theory training, white males are the oppressor and all people of color and other genders are the oppressed, and never the twain shall meet. You cannot change that because we're born that way. I'm born a racist and a misogynist, and I can't change it, and nothing I can do that. So I have to be suspect, and I have to be made to bow down to critical theory and acknowledge it, etc. That is not the equal opportunity approach that America and our armed forces has been all about since I was a very, very young man. I started doing this when I was 17. So I remember the classes. It was all about, hey, we treat everybody the same here. It doesn't matter where you come from, even what your educational background is. If your parents were rich, does not matter. You do well and you're going to succeed. That's been taken away from us, hasn't it? But people are still arguing that, no, you're taking away equal opportunity when you do away with DEI.
No, you're absolutely not. And but that's a leftist thing, because leftists like to divide and conquer. They like to put the populations against each other, and they like to slice them and dice them any way that they can to make them fight. You've seen that analogy about you got these red ants and black ants in a jar, and they don't fight until somebody shakes the jar, right? So you do have a bunch of folks out there who want to capitalize on division. Those are the leftists. They always go through a Marxist philosophy, even if they don't understand that they're coming from a Marxist philosophy. They are, and that is to sow division rather than to bring us together, and to sow conflict so they can get in the middle and capitalize on the gaps and seams between groups. So that's what they do, and it doesn't work in terms of making a good organization. It never has.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, we've got to take this break. When we come back, we'll hear from the president himself, where he lays out how he wants us to restore faith in America's military. We'll be right back with retired Army Colonel Lori Buckhout here on the Rob Maness Show. It's Truth Thursday, and we're going to give you the truth, whether it hurts or not.
Hello, I'm Brandon House. Is the government tracking you? Do they have access to all your data? Well, if you go to worldviewtalk.com, you'll find out about a cell phone company that, well, does not store your data. They don't do that. This is what they're known for. They don't store your data. You have privacy. You're not being tracked. That's why a lot of folks are turning to worldviewtalk.com. You'll find their prices are very competitive. All the details are there at worldviewtalk.com. Again, worldviewtalk.com. Oh, while you're there, not only do they have cell phones that aren't tracking you, you can find out about how to get a satellite phone. Should the whole system go down and you want to communicate with a family member or a loved one, you might want to have a satellite phone. Or how about their solar generators? They have great solar generators. Check them all out right now. Worldviewtalk.com, worldviewtalk.com.
And in a little while, I'll be signing 4 new executive orders. First is that I'm directing our new Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, who's going to be great, by the way. Thank you for the support. Thank you very much for the support. You really did support him greatly. I think he's going to be fantastic. I know him very well. I think he's going to be fantastic. He's what we need to immediately begin the construction of a state-of-the-art Iron Dome missile defense shield, which will be able to protect Americans. You know, we protect other countries, but we don't protect ourselves. And when Ronald Reagan wanted to do it many years ago, luckily we didn't. We didn't have the technology then. It was a concept, but we didn't. And now we have phenomenal technology. You see that with Israel. We're out of 319 rockets. They knocked down just about every one of them. So I think the United States is entitled to that. And everything will be made right here in the USA, 100%. And next, to ensure that we have the most lethal fighting force in the world, we will get transgender ideology the hell out of our military. It's going to be gone. In addition, we will stop our service members from being indoctrinated with radical left ideologies such as critical race theory. We're going to stop it. It's already been stopped. It's already been halted, totally halted. And finally, we will offer full reinstatement to any service member who was expelled from the armed forces due to the COVID vaccine mandate. And we will restore them to their former rank with full pay.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show. And shortly after the president gave that speech, he signed those executive orders. As a matter of fact, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth issued a memorandum just last night that details how the Department of Defense is going to do the 3 things that he talked about there in that little intro about getting rid of DEI, get rid of transgender ideology, and restore the folks that were harmed by the vaccine mandate. My guest today is retired Army Colonel Lori Buckout. Lori, you've been a commander at the senior level in the field. We both have that experience. Pete's memo says that it's a tenet of DOD, a foundational tenet, that the most qualified individuals are placed in positions of responsibility in accordance with merit-based, colorblind policies. I wanted to get your take on that because I don't know if you know this or not, but we currently have a Joint Chiefs of Staff chairman, General C.Q. Brown, and I'm paraphrasing now, not quoting, but I've heard him say that if somebody says that they believe in a colorblind society, it gives me pause or something to that effect. And he's not the only general officer in the United States Air Force, the Air Force, that I've heard have discussions like that. What are your thoughts on that? And how can the Secretary of Defense and the OSD staff and the departments get this done if we have a military leader at the chairman level that has that kind of viewpoint?
You know, I think we are going to have some reviews of folks and perhaps some review boards to see if some people need to let go if they can't change their ideologies. I think one of the problems with him saying something like that is really a little bit deeper because he actually discussed having a quota for pilots to match the quota, I believe, of certain races in America. He discussed it by race. If there's a 13% population of black males, for instance, he talked about having that percentage of pilots or of any other specialty. I don't think he talked about having half of all pilots being women, even though half of America's women. When you start to get quotas based on race or based on gender, that's a problem because, again, we just had this tremendous wreck, this heartbreaking tragedy. I don't care who's flying the plane as long as they're qualified. Again, back to the meritocracy. America needs to be defended against all enemies, foreign and domestic. You and I both take that oath. And as colonels, you and I have a lifetime oath. We are on duty until the day we die, and I know you know that. The fact that he says something like that should give you room for pause, especially when he talks about quotas or when anybody talks about quotas. We need to be lethal. We don't need to be quota-driven. We need to be deadly to enemies who want to harm us.
Yeah, and he did more than just say that about quotas. He actually signed a memo along with the last Secretary of the Air Force, Frank Kendall, that laid those numbers out and actually stated that we had too many white male pilots in the United States Air Force, and we need to have numbers that match in society, except for, I'm glad you pointed that out about women. I noticed that too. Women make up 50% of the population in this country. He didn't say that 50% of our pilots should also be women. That is very interesting. And it just goes to show you that these are not really, I don't believe they're principled positions. The colorblind phrase came from a guy in my lifetime. I remember hearing about it the first time from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s lips. In a speech that I had watched that he gave. And this crowd that believes in this indoctrination, this Marxist critical theory, the woke ideology, the gender ideology, the equity, diversity, equity, and inclusion methodologies, they think a colorblind society is an excuse for us white guys to be able to be racist. That's my impression.
Absolutely. And here's something else. He didn't say anything, half of all Air Force nurses are going to have to be males. None of that stuff was put out there. And I mean, you want to pick and choose your quotas, which just makes it look, frankly, more racist. It makes it look more extremist, and it makes it look like you're not really going for lethality. You're just going for numbers to please yourself or to please somebody, but you're definitely not going, to make the military more effective. I mean, it makes no sense. People want to do different things in life, and that's okay. More women want to be nurses than men, and you can dig into that all day long. More human beings want to be stay-at-home parents than men. More women do. And that's okay. Do we have to parse the numbers so that every single role, every single position in the nation is equally divided by some sort of a geographic and by some sort of a racial or gender divider? It's just ridiculous.
Yeah, and you set yourself up for failure. I go back to the accident from last night. If you're not hiring the best people, then you put yourself in a position where this could be a factor in that accident. We don't know yet. Way too early to tell. But we have to look at it and everything. Well, we got a hand up over in the audience. Let's go ahead and go over there. Shell is our host. Shell, who's got a question?
We have blue collar, sir.
10-4. Yeah, I was just on the discussion that we're having now. I have noticed that equity has become a new trigger word. Equity is a bad policy. Trying to make equal outcomes as opposed to equal opportunity. And equal opportunity should be not race based. It should be merit based. Whereas equity tries to make the outcome meet the numbers, the quota in the end. And I just considered that equity is a bad
question
policy.
for the colonel, sir?
Oh, no, ma'am. I was just adding to the conversation. Go ahead to the next.
Right. Thanks, Blue Collar. We appreciate it. Yeah, equity is really the divisive piece to this indoctrination. I call it Marxist because that's where it comes from, the division of people by race or by gender or whatever your identity groups or whatever. That's a Marxist tool that's been attempted to be used by communist countries against the United States the entire time that those communist countries have been in existence. One of them failed so far because they failed to do it. But our own people are pushing this policy, Lori, and that's a problem because it's indoctrinating all of our kids all the way down to the pre-K level and everything. You know, the president signed an executive order, I think, just yesterday or maybe day before yesterday. I'm losing track. There's so many good ones. Banning critical theory from being taught to our youngest kids in K through 12 and everything. And it's because of the equity piece. You can't ensure an outcome because it divides people, right?
You cannot. So I'll tell you what, my oldest son is going back over spring break to Cambodia to work in an orphanage there. He went back about 5 years ago. He went over about 5 years ago for the first time. A friend of mine, a Naval Academy graduate, sort of an expat, fell in love with Vietnam and fell in love with Cambodia and started an orphanage there. So my son's going back to teach. Now, he was always a good Republican kid, had the Trump button from 2016, the vintage one. He's a great kid. But if you want to get an idea of what it looks like to force equity, go over there and take a look at the killing fields, which he did, and the piles of skulls from the people that they killed. Now, everybody there still has no higher than about a fifth grade education because they put all the teachers, even people who wore glasses who looked intelligent, or outwork them to death in the fields because they were unequal to the peasants. So basically, you destroyed everybody, and the country is still in a shambles, and it's still a mess. But that's what you get when you force equity.
Yeah, exactly right. Well, Secretary Hegseth's memo says we're going to abolish DEI offices and all vestiges of such offices that subvert. He uses the word subvert meritocracy. And I think that's the right approach. But how? The Department of Defense is very large and very layered and has the largest budget of all of the federal government, and most of the people. That's an easy order to sign, but difficult to execute, isn't it?
Well, he's been working for the last 4 years to build up a staff of Sherpas and of guides and of people who know Defense Intelligence Agency, who know NSA, who know DOD, who know the Pentagon, and who know all these bureaucracies. And as I think they know the rocks to pick up, and I think they already are. People are astonished at the speed at which Trump is moving. But I'm telling you what, he's prepared now in a way that he just was not last time, God bless him. Because, unless you've been inside that bureaucracy, and you and I both have to a degree, especially working in the Joint Staff like we both did, we see just what a Byzantine nightmare that place is. And if you don't have guides, you're not going to be effective. So I am already seeing that he knows the rocks to turn over. He's been doing his homework.
Oh, yeah. I had a conversation with Russ Vought, who was President Trump's last OMB director back during when I was at the announcement in November 22 at Mar-a-Lago. And Russ told me that they had been thinking about this ever since he stopped by his office door on the way out on January 20th, a little bit before noon, and said, hey, you need to be ready because we're going to run again. So
there you go.
They put a lot into this. It's obvious that they were ready and everything. And we got to take another break. When we come back, we're going to look at take a little bit deeper dive into this piece about how do we restore the military members that were harmed by the vaccine mandate that turned out to be an unlawful order. There's a lot of layers there. This we'll go through an example of what some of the team volunteers have put together, looking at how to get this done, to get people back in the service and encourage them to come back in the service by using the right policies. We'll be right back with retired Army Colonel Lori Buckout about restoring the American people's faith in the Department of Defense.
So the Biden-Harris DoD COVID-19 vaccine mandate was very damaging to the military. It forced thousands of service members out, and thousands do not want to join now. The Biden-Harris DoD has the lowest recruiting in modern history, and now they're pushing more woke training. So how do you plan to repair the military from the damage that was done and hold military leaders accountable?
So I want to have them come back into the military with pay. And, you know, they've been talking about that, but it never happened. They never did what they said they were going to do. There should have never been a mandate. That should have never happened. You should have been given choice, as we say. We want choice in education, and we want a choice there, too. And that should have never happened. And, you know, we've lost some of our best people in the military, too. Did you leave? Did you leave? Did you ever take the vaccine or anything?
I never did, sir.
So you want a choice, yeah. And do you want it? Would you go back in if they were able to?
As long as there's accountability, potentially.
Yeah, no, there would be accountability, is right. They're going to will fire their asses, but they would. We don't want to lose this guy. We want to get. He's central casting. We want to get him back in. Yeah, we're going to take care of it. I hope you do come back, or I hope you do very well outside. To be honest, wherever you are, I just want you to do well. But we're going to get a lot of people coming back. They should have never had the mandate. The mandate was a big mistake, and they treated people terribly, terribly. Okay? Thank you very much. Great.
Mr. President.
You look great. Thank you.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show. It's Truth Thursday, and we're talking about how to restore faith in the Department of Defense for America with my guest today is retired U.S. Army Colonel Lori Buckout. And Lori, that was in Fayetteville, North Carolina on October 5th, I believe. I was actually sitting next to the guy in the back row, just to give you some context there. The gentleman talking was Special Operations Forces Officer John Frankman, who left the Army because of the COVID vaccine. The person on my left is a guy named Matt Lohmeyer, who wrote the book Irresistible Revolution and got relieved of command in the Space Force. And that later, when he asked his question, Mr. Trump said that he would lead a task force, which we're going to talk about that before the end of the show because the task force has already been set. But that young man's been nominated for Undersecretary of the Air Force, so he won't be leading that task force. But the task force is established, and but this vaccine restoration really has to go far beyond what you hear in the media, which is there's about 8,900 that were forced to leave, which means they got kicked out. But there's really about 95,000 people that left on their own because they saw what was happening and their enlistments came up to the end and they left, or they were threatened with prosecution and they left or retired. and those kinds of things. And we've got a little chart that people that have been harmed that are working on teams of volunteers to put this process together are really making some good suggestions. And this chart's probably the best picture of what I've been hearing, because I've been talking to them and I'm in their groups, and I'm a signer of the Declaration of Military Accountability that came out last January in 2024, and they are all working on this too. So the first one is the apology. It's got to be more than just the current president stepping up and saying, "Hey, I apologize," right?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It is a nightmare process. And by the way, I was at that same event sitting in the front row. So I remember, like, wait a second, I know this event. So I think you and I just missed each other. But hey, thank you for signing that declaration. Thank you for all your work on this, because I had so many, mostly former soldiers, call me because, I'm older. And say, hey, my kid's a private first class. My son he doesn't know what to do. He's thinking about getting out. I'm like, look, man, I can't advise you on that. I'm not a big fan of the jab. And he goes, he's going to, and I've got guys telling me, yeah, he's going to get out. But, of course it's an apology. It's a heartfelt apology. But that vaccine edict changed so many lives of these servicemen and women. It really did impact them, maybe some in the good ways. But for folks who really love their country and want to serve, a lot into bad ways as well. It's going to be tough to recover from, especially when I saw later in the chart, you look at schools, you look at command opportunities, you look at promotion boards, and those sorts of things. Gosh, it's going to be hard to keep that fair. It really, really is. It's a nightmare.
Yeah, let's talk about that. They've got to be afforded these missed opportunities, because a lot of people probably don't realize that a career path, especially for an officer, but for enlisted and officer these days, we're a professional force. So we have very, I would say, tightly controlled career paths that leads you to achieve success, and that's defined usually as being the top enlisted person or a 4-star general if you're an officer. And it's assumed everybody's striving to do that along these career paths. And when that is disrupted by even 6 months or a year, that's what that afforded missed opportunities line of operation on the chart means, is we've got to go through the whole system, the personnel system and the promotion system, right? And look at these people's records and flag them so that they're fully reinstated, right?
Yep. But, we have to be careful to not disadvantage the people who stayed in. Like, for instance, if you have a guy who got promoted to E8, well, he stayed in the force and decided to suck it up and take the jab, even though he didn't want it, but he stayed in and he's an E8. So a guy gets out and then comes back, and 3 years later, maybe the guy who got out because of the jab wasn't really the quality of the guy who stayed in anyway, right? Just playing devil's advocate here. But if he gets everything restored and ends up in the same place as that other guy, that's not fair. And of course, it's not fair for substandard folks who stayed in and the great folks who got out, that the substandard folks got ahead. So, it's really going to have to be managed individual by individual. I was actually an assignment officer for Army majors and lieutenant colonels at one point in my life. And it's just what you said. It is a very structured path with very defined gates. If you want to make major, you got to do this. If you got to make, lieutenant colonel, you want to do this. If you want to command, you got to do this. And the same thing is true, as you said, it's a professional force. And the career development for our enlisted guys is no less intense, and it's probably more intense than it is for senior officers.
Yeah, exactly right. Well, we've got more hands up in the audience. Let's go ahead and take some questions here real quick. Go ahead, Shell.
We have Cookie, sir.
Good afternoon, Colonels. Great show so far. Just a couple questions. With this DEI and letting the trans in and they can wear their dresses or whatever, how far back did this set our military and the readiness of it? is one. And then the other one is, how quickly do you think we will bounce back and become that big, strong fighting force that we know?
Great question. I'll let you take it first, Lori.
Well, I think that the trans thing and the wearing the dresses and stuff like that, I'd like to address that very quickly. The biggest issue for me on that, besides morale issues and the fact that we just look just crazy to other nations and to everybody with men walking around in dresses, was the readiness issue. When you have people who are going through hormone treatments, psychological treatments, surgery, pre or post surgery, they can't deploy. They can't go fight. You can't go to war with an IV bag, or if you've got, scar tissue healing, or I can't even go into the horrific stuff that could happen. You can't go to combat like that. So our readiness is exceptionally challenged by having people who are like that in the force. The bounce back, it's going to take a little time, but frankly, I've been astonished at how quickly President Trump and now Secretary Hegseth are moving out and drawing fire. So I think it's going to be better than we thought.
Yeah, I mean, the Secretary's memo also laid out this task force that President Trump was talking about at that Fayetteville town hall, and he's already assigned it to the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness's office. There's not even been a nominee named for that position yet, but there are actings in there that it's my understanding are going to fulfill this policy. One of the things that the task force will do is promotion and selection reform. So it'll get all of this. You got to promote certain numbers of women, certain numbers of black men, certain numbers of Asian Americans out of the system, unless there's an operational need. And I like that. Look, we cannot close doors if there's an operational need to have some kind of carve out for something, because sometimes specific types of people are needed for specific types of positions when it comes to national security. So I'm good with that. But it expressly eliminates quotas, objectives, and goals, and any other term that might be used for that. And we saw this at the service academies. I'm on the board of advisors for Stand Together Against Racism and Radicalism in the Services, or STARS. And one of the things that they're Air Force Academy graduates that organized that group. And one of the things they saw was in the admissions system for academy admissions, they saw that these quotas are being used, but then the leadership would go, oh, no, those are just objectives. They're targets. They're not real quotas, et cetera. So the task force is going to be looking at how the services and the staffs are eliminating that kind of thing altogether. I think that's great. Let's take one more question before we go to the next segment. Go ahead, Joe.
We have Wib, sir.
Thank you, Shel, and thank you, Colonel Squared. I have a question about, and you'll excuse me if I pause for a minute because I'm savoring this since it's the first time I've said it. Defense Secretary Hegseth, in his video today, giving a briefing to the world, basically, was completely different from Secretary Austin and how he did things. Do you believe that any kind of oath, being under oath when speaking to public would move the needle at all in improving trust in the Department of Defense?
Good question.
Well, I think that we have to remember and we have to remind people, and I don't think we've done enough of that lately. I think that in the last 10 years or in the last 4 years, well, actually going back to Obama, they focused more on feelings than what your actual obligations are. They focused on diversity, they focused on equity, they haven't focused on the obligation that you have as a citizen to your nation. I think Trump's bringing that back. I think patriotism is back in style. And with that goes that oath that Colonel Maness and I can certainly quote to support and defend the Constitution of all against all enemies, foreign and domestic, true, bear fruit, and allegiance to the same, et cetera, et cetera. I think that just reminding people that public servants, like the Colonel and I, and like Secretary Hegseth, we have an obligation to serve. And we have an obligation to remain true to that and to serve that honestly and to the best of our ability and with integrity. So I think patriotism is back in style, integrity is back in style, service is back in style. So I don't think he's going to have to take an oath every time he speaks, because we are reinforcing the fact that we are now a nation of laws. We're a nation of integrity. We are a nation of honor. We are a nation of fulfilling your obligations as you hold your right hand to support and defend our beloved Constitution.
Yeah, the only other thing I would add to that, Lori, I agree with everything you said. I would just add to it that we are now back to a transparent government that is obligated to serve the people because we are public servants. We are not tyrants. We're not authoritarians. We don't know better than the mom and dad on the street. We're just public servants. And I think this video that Secretary Hegseth put out this morning is a great start to breaking that wall of non-transparency that we've seen at all levels of government. And that is the way that I think trust is going to be reestablished. So we got to take our last break. When we come back, we're going to talk about that far right line on the chart. It's called accountability, holding senior leaders accountable, because there's been some movement in that lately from the Secretary of Defense and the President of the United States, and it needs to be discussed and needs to be out there. We'll be right back with retired Army Colonel Lori Buckout here on the Rob Maness Show.
Hello, I'm Brandon House. I want to thank you for all your support at wvwfoundation.com that helps make possible pushing out 24/7 content for free. Without your support, we'd have to put it all behind a paywall. But thanks to you and your support through our foundation, we're able to push it out for free as a broadcast service and broadcast ministry of WVW Foundation. Please consider going there and setting up an automatic monthly contribution, or go there and make an occasional contribution. If you prefer to support us through the mail, you'll find our mailing address there at wvwfoundation.com. You can also call and make your contribution over the phone by calling 901-825-0652. That's 901-825-0652. Again, all these details are available at wvwfoundation.com. Thank you for your support as we try to help people around the world understand the times through the lens of a Christian worldview.
I want to ask you about General Mark Milley. His photo, his portrait was taken down at the Pentagon. He has, I think there's currently a commission being put together to explore whether or not he should be demoted. His security clearances have been taken away. Tell me the thought process, both there at the Pentagon, at the White House, with Mark Milley.
Accountability is back, Will. It's the understanding that if you actively undermined the chain of command, as General Milley did under the previous Trump administration, we are going to review those actions administratively inside the Defense Department. Mark Milley got a pardon. That's something President Biden was in his purview to do. Just like in our purview at the Defense Department, we have the opportunity to review things he may have done inside the chain of command while President Trump was president that undermined those authorities. So security clearance in the interim is revoked. There will be a review of the rank he will retain upon retirement, and he'll have that process. But this is a demonstration that inside President Trump's Defense Department, we're going to hold not just junior levels or the highest levels possible accountable for actions, and that's what the signal this is meant to send.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show, and it's Truth Thursday here on Worldview Tube on this show, and my guest today is retired U.S. Army Colonel Lori Buckout. And Lori, going back to that chart that we were showing in the last segment, over on the far right there, that line. And remember, I'll remind you, this chart is made by men and women that were harmed by this unlawful vaccine mandate order. It says hold senior leaders accountable, recall retired generals, court-martial if necessary, and punish to the maximum extent of the law. And I think this is a good start, Lori. they're going to do what's called a grade determination on General Milley, and they revoked his security clearance.
I think that's fantastic. As far as revoking the security clearance, that absolutely needed to be done right away. And the fact that this guy admitted to working with the Chinese government to undermine the president of the United States, to undermine the man that the people elected, and seemed to have no shame in it, and seemed to have some pride in it, he needs to be reviewed, absolutely. You know, just because you've got 4 stars, you cannot be held above the law. You cannot be held above the Uniform Code of Military Justice. You and I wouldn't be, you know, and E6 wouldn't be. So he shouldn't. If anything, we should scrutinize harder. He should be held to a higher standard because of the rank, because of the level of responsibility. So I love it, and that needs to be cascading all across government right now.
Yeah, and I think it is. You know, that's why the media and the left is so upset. But and you mentioned the Chinese and the chain of command and how he subverted his role by telling his Chinese counterpart, if we're going to go to war with you, and I'm paraphrasing, but this is pretty close, I'm going to call you. And then he inserted himself in the nuclear command and control decision process outside of his legal role, which is as a direct advisor to the president, and put himself in the lower level of the chain of command in the nuclear command and control system and said, you will call me if this reaches here at this point. And that point wasn't at the level of the president of the United States. So that was another one. But I think the worst is the outcome of the Afghanistan withdrawal debacle. The only guy punished for that was a guy named Lieutenant Colonel Stu Scheller, United States Marine Corps,
Remember that?
the 05. And guess what he's going to be doing? You remember that Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness? Stu has been named as the senior advisor to that position. So he is going to be heavily involved in holding these people accountable that really did him wrong and cost him his military retirement, I believe, and his career.
I love it. I absolutely love it. But you know what? Of course, my God, the whole Abbey Gate thing. I mean, I was depressed for days when that went down. You think of all those lives needlessly lost. Then you see people hanging onto those airplanes, falling out of the sky from hundreds of feet as the planes take off. You talk about just a gut-wrenching, heartbreaking withdrawal. And, of course, the billions of dollars of equipment still left over there that's finding its way around the world to attack our troops. You know, it is still out there and still being used against us.
And the open secret that there are American citizens being held hostage by the Taliban that just broke in the news not too long ago before the president retook office. Well, we got one more question over in the audience. Let's go ahead and take that before we get to the end of the show. Go ahead, Shell.
We have Colonel Gannon Burton, sir.
Hey, Colonels, thank you so much. This is so important, and the truth will set us free. There's one truth, though, that I think is critical to this, and it goes back to the vaccines, and that is that getting the DOD to acknowledge what Dr. Teresa Long and Dr. Ted Macy have brought to the forefront and were punished for, which is exposing the fact that military members have been actually physically injured. There was a 300% increase in miscarriages among military women because of the COVID vaccine. There was a 1,000% increase in heart failure because of the COVID vaccine. And if you know of any movement or have any leverage or any information about actually getting the DOD to acknowledge that we were poisoned, and that's why I retired, to avoid being poisoned, and thank you so much again. But if you could speak to that, and that's the accountability that I think we need, which is the acknowledgement that the vaccines were actually poison, did more harm than good, and then a restoration and acknowledgement for all the people, which statistically they'll be able to figure it out if they actually do the work, who were harmed by these vaccines. Thank you.
Oh, God bless you. And I'm so sorry you had to retire for that, but you're right, that is no joke. Those of us who are watching young athletes drop dead, it is heartbreaking. The miscarriage statistic, I had heard something about that, but not that number, and that it's horrifying. I think RFK Jr. is going to be stepping into that role. I think that as we appoint a decent Surgeon General, I think that's going to make a difference as well. I can't imagine Trump letting this stone go unturned, to tell you the truth. Colonel Maness, what do you think?
Yeah, I think Secretary Hegseth on the Defense Department side, having guys like Stu Scheller and Matt Lohmeyer in the Air Force, and I'm hoping that Dr. Theresa Long gets an appointment somewhere in the administration, and then Mark Bashaw, who was the Navy lieutenant that had to go through a whole bunch of things when he whistleblew on the DMED database, showing these numbers and those kind of things, and and then the officer that was court-martialed. All of those have to be have passed the restoration, but one of the things that I'm really concerned about is that 98% of the force took this shot. And the younger people were the ones that were most physically harmed by that. When you look at the numbers Colonel Gannon or Colonel Burton talked about, they're all in the younger cohort. And what I'm concerned about is the actual readiness of our armed forces to go fight and win a real war when their health is in question. And we don't know when that's going to pop up. So we've got to have a really strategic investigation and really a long-term study on this cohort of men and women that are still serving in the armed forces to see, so we know what the effects are, because we really don't know, because they seem to be individualized. And I don't know if it's because it's an mRNA type vaccine or whatever, but the side effects, the really risky ones, show at different times and under different circumstances, depending on who you are, what body type you are, what your gender is, your age, et cetera. So we've really got to do an in-depth, long-term study on those, because imagine this: if 98% of the people have had this shot, and we lose 30% because they get stressed out and they have heart attacks at the beginning of a war, and we weren't expecting it, that's a problem. So I'm really, really concerned about that. And mostly concerned, though, is that this 95,000 people, which the injured are included in that number, I believe, have really had their some of them, the injured ones, have had their lives destroyed. They can't come back on active duty any more than we can have somebody that's had multiple heart attacks or whatever, has a disease that they can't deploy with, and those kind of things. So their lives have been destroyed, and they need to be made whole. And the Department of Veterans Affairs, I would ask that Secretary Collins, when he gets confirmed, get with Secretary Hegseth and team up on this so that we're doing the right things, and we're making these medical retirements and identifying these as service connected before they leave the armed forces, and then the VA picks it up and acknowledges it, because what's been done so far is not enough. There's been a couple, but it's got to be looked at the same way we look at Agent Orange and burn pits, don't you think? I'll give you the last word.
You know what? I could not agree more. And I'm so glad you brought up those long-term health things in terms of veterans who have to be taken care of. You got to fight the VA every time you go in. They assume you're lying the minute you walk in the door. And then it's just like you're going through a lie detector test. Are you sure that hurts? Really? Where did that happen? When the majority of veterans, you and I both served about 30 years. And my gosh, are you broke when you get out? It's just tough on a body. Add this to that stress, and I think you're absolutely right. And different types of bodies, different blood types, different ethnicities are all reacting differently to this type of protein that was injected, in so many people. It's a whole different fight now. We've got to address it head on. So God bless you and all your work on that, Colonel Rob, because it's huge.
Well, thank you for joining me today, Lori. We appreciate it. Lori, you can follow her on X at Lori Buckhout. Just go there and you can find out wherever she's at in there. And I'm sure I'm going to have you back because I like getting contributor guests on board with the team, and I appreciate what you do.
I love being with you. Colonel Rob, thank you so much. You are a blessing. Thank you for everything you do.
Well, thank you very much. Well, Monday is More War Monday again, unfortunately. Former Army Staff Officer David Pine has a new proposal for the Trump administration. He's trying to get it to somebody that'll listen about a peace plan for Ukraine, which we know is at top of mind for who? Donald J. Trump, the President of the United States of America. Today, the 47th president. I'll see you then on Worldview Tube.
Hello, I'm Brandon House. Is the government tracking you? Do they have access to all your data? Well, if you go to worldviewtalk.com, you'll find out about a cell phone company that, well, does not store your data. They don't do that. This is what they're known for. They don't store your data. You have privacy. You're not being tracked. That's why a lot of folks are turning to worldviewtalk.com. You'll find their prices are very competitive. All the details are there at worldviewtalk.com. Again, worldviewtalk.com. Oh, while you're there, not only do they have cell phones that aren't tracking you, you can find out about how to get a satellite phone. Should the whole system go down and you want to communicate with a family member or a loved one, you might want to have a satellite phone. Or how about their solar generators? They have great solar generators. Check them all out right now. Worldviewtalk.com, worldviewtalk.com.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Slingshot TV. I'm your host, Troy Smith. We're so glad to have you back for yet another episode of Slingshot TV. And the breaking news today is, of course, the plane crash in Washington, D.C. that has claimed the lives of 64 people. We have reports that a Black Hawk helicopter collided with an American Airlines passenger jet that had 64 people on it, including the crew, all of which have sadly passed away. President Trump held a press briefing this morning on what was going on and addressed what happened. But first, we want to go to D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser, who held a press conference on this crash and updated us immediately on what happened. Let's roll that clip first here today on Slingshot TV with Troy Smith.
I'm Muriel Bowser. I'm the mayor of Washington, D.C. I'm at Reagan National Airport. I am joined by United States Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy, United States Senator Jim Moran, Senator Roger Marshall, Jack Potter, the CEO of the Metropolitan Washington Airports Authority. We are here to brief you on the very tragic events of this evening. Where we know a passenger plane coming to the airport here collided with a military helicopter. Our fire department, DC Fire and EMS, supported by fire departments and police departments from across the Washington metropolitan region, are executing a rescue operation in the Potomac River. They are working diligently in very dark and cold conditions, cold water, to execute this rescue operation. We have had the opportunity to be briefed by American Airlines officials. I'm told that American Airlines leadership is on the way to Washington as well, and officials are in the airport talking to families now. We do have a 1-800 number where families should contact us, should contact American Airlines for more information, and we will be providing that information shortly. I am going to turn to a number of officials to provide as much information as we can this evening, and we expect to have more frequent briefings at daylight.
We actually have a clip, folks, of that collision real quickly. Let's roll that clip now. It's a silent clip, so no need to cut away to it, but just to show it as B-roll here, we can show as you see the airliner there and the Black Hawk helicopter collide, and we'll see a zoomed-in version of it here. And as we're going to talk about here, this helicopter surges towards the plane, almost like a heat-seeking missile, getting in its path. Something that we're being told is preventable. They're calling people conspiracy theorists all over the place for raising questions about exactly what happened here. But the President of the United States has asked questions, and so should we, about what happened. President Trump addressed this plane crash this morning during a press briefing. But before he did that, I'd like to put up the Truth Social post that he put out that was talking about the conditions that led to this. He said the airplane was on a perfect and routine line of approach to the airport. The helicopter was going straight at the airplane for an extended period of time. It is a clear night. The lights on the plane were blazing. Why didn't the helicopter go up or down or turn? Why didn't the control tower tell the helicopter what to do instead of asking if they saw the plane? This is a bad situation that looks like it should have been prevented. Not good. Trump's transportation secretary, during a briefing immediately after this tragic event, said that what occurred was completely preventable. Trump himself held a briefing. Let's roll that clip from Trump's briefing this morning talking about exactly what happened here in this tragic situation with the plane crash with the Black Hawk helicopter in D.C. that's claimed the lives of at least 64 people.
I speak to you this morning in an hour of anguish for our nation. Just before 9 p.m. last night, an American Airlines regional jet carrying 60 passengers and 4 crew collided with an Army Black Hawk helicopter carrying 3 military service members over the Potomac River in Washington, D.C., while on final approach to Reagan National Airport. Both aircraft crashed instantly and were immediately submerged into the icy waters of the Potomac. Real tragedy. The massive search and rescue mission was underway throughout the night, leveraging every asset at our disposal, and I have to say the local, state, federal, military, including the United States Coast Guard in particular, they've done a phenomenal job. So quick, so fast, it was mobilized immediately. The work has now shifted to a recovery mission. Sadly, there are no survivors. This was a dark and excruciating night in our nation's capital and in our nation's history, and a tragedy of terrible proportions. As one nation, we grieve for every precious soul that has been taken from us so suddenly, and we are a country of really, we are in mourning. This is really shaken a lot of people, including people, very sadly, from other nations who were on the flight. For the family members back in Wichita, Kansas, here in Washington, D.C., and throughout the United States and in Russia, we have a Russia contingent of very talented people. Unfortunately, were on that plane. Very, very, very sorry about that. Whose loved ones were aboard the passenger jet. We can only begin to imagine the agony that you're all feeling. Nothing worse. On behalf of the First Lady, myself, and 340 million Americans, our hearts are shattered alongside yours, and our prayers are with you now and in the days to come. We'll be working very, very diligently in the days to come.
Well, there you have it, folks. President Trump, during this press conference, talked about the problem with DEI and the role that this may have played in what we saw happen in this terrible incident. And he talked about the air traffic controllers, and this has become a flashpoint. A lot of people attacking the president over this. But before we play that, I want to play this real quickly to show exactly what he's talking about. President Trump's own Secretary of Transportation, Transportation Secretary Duffy, during a press conference just after this crash, highlighted the fact that this crash was entirely preventable. So whether it's from DEI, whether it's from the hiring policies of the Biden administration generally, this was a preventable crash that killed over 60 people. That's the point, but the media wants to make it about race. They want to divide people, and they want to make sure that we don't focus on the hiring policies that led to this incident, because it's an indictment on their belief system. It's an indictment of their political system that they've pushed into every aspect of life. They are looking at the consequences of what they've pushed, and they can't stand it. President Trump bringing it up has enraged people like Chuck Schumer, who we're going to play early. But let's play later in the show. Let's play Sean Duffy telling us that this was entirely preventable before we go to President Trump talking about diversity and destroying Caitlin Collins of CNN. Let's roll that.
Don't read into that we had how many hours the pilots on a military aircraft had, and you had another question for me that was...
Last night the president had said that this could be prevented, and also that air traffic control, questioning why they may not have communicated with the helicopter telling them what to do.
We are going to wait for all the information to come in from this vantage point, but to back up what the president said, what I've seen so far, do I think this was preventable? Absolutely.
Thank you.
Words from the transportation secretary. We have footage of President Trump talking about this that's really become the flashpoint for the media, focusing on it. Let's roll that clip of Trump talking about the role of DEI in this crash and really in the quality of the air traffic controllers and other government officials in Washington, D.C., now that he's president once again. Let's roll that.
Are you saying this crash was somehow caused and the result of diversity hiring? And what evidence have you seen to support these claims?
It just could have been. We have a high standard. We've had a much higher standard than anybody else. And there are things where you have to go by brain power. You have to go by psychological quality. And psychological quality is a very important element of it. These are various very powerful tests that we put to use, and they were terminated by Biden. And Biden went by a standard that's the exact opposite. So we don't know, but we do know that you had two planes at the same level. You had a helicopter and a plane. That shouldn't have happened. And we'll see. We're going to look into that, and we're going to see. But certainly for an air traffic controller, we want the brightest, the smartest, the sharpest. We want somebody that's psychologically superior, and that's what we're going to have. Yeah.
Well, and that has become a point of fixation for the media, and particularly Chuck Schumer. You know, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, we've talked about it on the show today, tweets or this week. He tweets out constantly attacks on Trump, attacks on Republicans for anything he can possibly find. And this tragedy was nothing short of an opportunity for Chuck Schumer to do just that once again. Really bizarrely, reversely claiming that Trump was politicizing the crash in D.C. Schumer went on a berating attack and really leveled just unbelievable attacks at President Trump and his officials in his cabinet for attempting to have a swift response to this horrid disaster that's claimed the lives of dozens of Americans. You know, Chuck Schumer has no problem going up on the Senate floor, making this outwardly political, because this weasel does nothing but make the political attacks against President Trump all day, every day. All you have to do is go to his Twitter feed and see literally every hour he tweets out a different attack on President Trump, whether it's for attempts to call the unbelievable, out-of-control government spending that's destroyed this country with inflation, whether it's Trump's promise to secure the border that Chuck Schumer and Joe Biden let open to let 20 million undocumented people into the country, whether it's Trump's signing of the Laken-Riley Act, which allows federal officials to come after criminal illegal aliens across this country. Chuck Schumer's quite angry with that, and he wants to make this horrid, tragic event, this plane crash, about politics and use it as an attempt to attack Donald Trump. Donald Trump is not using this as a political wedge, sir. You are, Chuck Schumer. Let's roll the clip of the weasel from New York really just politicizing the death of 60-plus Americans. A disgusting act took place in the Senate today. Chuck Schumer, you are a disgrace. Let's roll that clip.
Mr. President, this morning, our hearts go out to everyone impacted by the horrible, heartbreaking incident at Reagan Washington National Airport last night. I've been briefed on the horrific incident at DCA and have continued to monitor the situation. My heart goes out to everyone who was impacted by this incident. I'm praying for the victims, their families, and our brave first responders as we monitor the situation. But I have to tell you, I just watched President Trump's news conference. Listen, it's one thing for internet pundits to spew off conspiracies. It's another for the President of the United States to throw out idle speculation as bodies are still being recovered and families are still notified. It just turns your stomach.
Yeah. Well, you know, Chuck, what turns my stomach is to see you out in front of the Supreme Court yelling that you're going to get retribution on these people and that there's going to be hell to pay if they dare to vote against you and your abortion agenda. You've never been held to account for that, by the way. I would urge the DOJ in the future to take a look if they're under the control of Pam Bondi and the FBI under the control of Kash Patel. I urge them to take a look at your statements there at the Supreme Court, because it was right after that we found people crawling around the property of Justice Kavanaugh with guns. It was right after that we found people giving death threats to Clarence Thomas. So I think it's fair to say that, you know, when you have tremendously left-wing agitators threatening the lives of Supreme Court justices after you stand on the steps out there, Chuck Schumer, and give the war cry and tell them that it's okay to attack these people, that they've released the whirlwind and they won't know what hit them. Those are your words, Chuck Schumer. So why have you never been held to account for that? You ushered in an era of political violence when you gave that speech back in 2017 or 2018. And you've never been held accountable for it. Again, the DOJ must take a look at this. And to have Schumer up there openly politicizing this tragedy shows you how desperate Washington, D.C. is to get a footing against President Trump in this next administration. And it doesn't matter if they have to stand on the graves of people who just died in a plane crash in order to do it. They will do it. We have a ton of more clips to get to today, folks. I think that concludes everything. No, we do want it from President Trump's conference today. He did destroy Caitlin Collins of CNN. My favorite, you know, I've co-hosted the Roger Stone Zone podcast for over a year now. And one of the funniest moments in all my years of working with Roger, we played a clip of Caitlin Collins on the show. And we come back and Roger, cold, staring right into the camera, he says, "Troy, who's that man?" That's vintage Roger. Trump destroyed Caitlin Collins in the press briefing room. Today, let's roll that clip. A classic moment for President Trump.
We don't even yet know the names of the 67 people who were killed, and you are blaming Democrats and DEI policies and air traffic control and seemingly the member of the U.S. military who was flying that Black Hawk helicopter. Don't you think you're getting ahead of the investigation right now?
No, I don't think so at all. I don't think with the names of the people, you mean the names of the people that are on the plane?
You think that's going to make a difference?
Does it comfort their families
They
to
are
hear you
a
blaming
group of
DEI
people that have lost their lives. If you want a list of the names, we can give you that. We'll be giving that very soon. We're in coordination with American Airlines. We're in coordination very strongly, obviously, with the military. But I think that's not a very smart question.
But are you
I'm
blaming-
surprised coming from you.
Are you blaming your
Said the best, folks. Also, we have J.D. Vance, who spoke at that press conference as well, really showing himself to be a strong representative for the country and a strong voice in a tough time for the country, showing his chops. I like that J.D. Vance is present in this administration. We're already seeing more from him and hearing more from him than we ever heard from Vice President Mike Pence, which, looking back on it, may be a good thing because knowing what we know now, Pence, not exactly an ace. So let's roll that clip of J.D. Vance up at the press briefing today.
Thank you, Mr. President, for your leadership. I just want to reemphasize something the President said, and you've heard from the Secretary of Transportation and of Defense. There really was a whole of government response. We were all on the phone. We were all communicating yesterday, trying to get to the bottom of this immediately, but also try to communicate with the American people about what happened. Something the President said that I think bears reemphasizing, which is that when you don't have the best standards in who you're hiring, it means on the one hand, you're not getting the best people in government, but on the other hand, it puts stresses on the people who are already there. And I think that is a core part of what President Trump is going to bring and has already brought to Washington, D.C. is we want to hire the best people because we want the best people at air traffic control, and we want to make sure we have enough people at air traffic control who are actually competent to do the job. If you go back to just some of the headlines over the past 10 years, you have many hundreds of people suing the government because they would like to be air traffic controllers, but they were turned away because of the color of their skin. That policy ends under Donald Trump's leadership because safety is the first priority of our aviation industry. Thank you, Mr. President.
There you have it, folks. J.D. Vance really giving it to him. One more clip on this regard, folks. The American Airlines CEO put out a statement on this crash talking about the kind of lead up to this. I found this clip very interesting because he talks about a subsidiary of American Airlines that was responsible for this. We're not hearing a lot of mainstream news outlets talk about the details of this crash, but the idea that there's a third party involved, it's going to warrant investigation at Slingshot News. We're going to be covering this in depth. So let's roll that clip of the American Airlines CEO talking about this horrendous event in D.C.
Hello, everyone. I'm Robert Isom, the CEO of American Airlines. I want to brief you on a serious accident that occurred involving an American Eagle aircraft. The aircraft was operated by PSA Airlines, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of American Airlines. First and most importantly, I'd like to express our deep sorrow about these events. This is a difficult day for all of us at